Hello, thank you so much for coming to my talk today. I just want to extend a huge thank you to the organisers of this year's Beyond Autism conference for inviting me to speak to everybody today. It was a real honour just to receive the invitation. I was absolutely thrilled, and I know how much time and effort goes into organising this conference, probably even more so now that it's online. Everything just takes that little bit longer to organise. So today I'm going to speak to you a little bit about promoting stakeholder engagement in ASD research, and I'm going to do that using a current project that I'm working on with the help of a stakeholder advisory group. So I'm going to talk about how we went about engaging stakeholders, what I think we did well, what challenges we face in engaging stakeholders, and we'll just end with what my recommendations would be for effectively engaging stakeholders in research, even in systematic literature reviews. I can be a bit of a talker, so I've tried to be very, very structured with my timings for each slide, so we're not rushing at the end. So fingers crossed I stick to those. So this is just a little overview of what we're going to cover today. So after some introductions and a little bit of background into my own experience, I'm going to chat to you about the Campbell collaboration, which is the library that hosts our systematic review. I'll of course cover the review itself, but not in too much detail because I don't want this presentation to be too much filled with data. I want to really have the focus on stakeholder engagement, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you share your experiences with me at the end, or even give me some tips on that. So I'll move on to the stakeholder engagement focus, the challenges we face in engaging stakeholders, and lastly I want to talk to you about evidence and gap maps. So that is the plan for today. So I haven't even introduced myself yet. My name's Catherine. I live in Belfast with my husband Ralph and my two kids Maggie and Patrick, pictured there because they had to get in, of course, and I work in the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work at Queen's University in Belfast. I've worked in the autism field for about 14 years now, but I've only been in academia for 6 years. So I got my PhD at Ulster University, and that was focused excuse me, on using ABA to improve educational outcomes, specifically literacy for at-risk children. So that included children who had recently been adopted, having spent a significant amount of their lives in care, children with a special educational need, and those from low socioeconomic backgrounds in Belfast, and in particular areas of Belfast where the effects of our post-conflict society were quite rife and quite strong. So for 8 years prior to me working at Queen's, I worked in schools, homes and clinical settings providing ABA to individuals with ASD. Predominantly that was young children in the beginning, so between the ages of 2 and 10, and then I moved on to America for a little while to work in Boston at the New England Centre for Children, and when I was there I worked with autistic adults between the ages of 18 and 22, and I just absolutely loved that, and I do feel that if I ever went back into practice, that's the kind of age group that I would go for. I really enjoy getting these individuals prepared for their careers and living independently. I just got such a thrill out of that. So I'm loving working in academia now too. I get to supervise really great PhD students, and I teach on the Masters in ABA on the ethics module and the assessment module. Teaching on this Masters is amazing. Like, our students are just so motivated to be there, and so while I do miss clinical practice a little bit, I am enjoying where I'm at now. So that is me, and when I am not teaching ABA, I am baking, but that's a story for a different day. So we'll just jump straight into the Campbell collaboration. The project that I want to speak to you all about today was conducted with the Campbell collaboration and Campbell UK and Ireland specifically. The Campbell Collaboration's mission statement is above there, and it is to promote social and economic change through the production and use of systematic reviews and other evidence synthesis for evidence-based policy and practice. If you're not so familiar with systematic literature reviews, they started out as a methodology that was predominantly used in the fields of medicine and health. And a lot of those particular systematic literature reviews are housed in the Cochrane Systematic Review Library. But as they rose in popularity for our fields and fields outside of medicine, the Campbell Collaboration became one of the main libraries for these types of reviews, and that was in 1999. So we're still dealing with, a relatively new methodology here. Campbell and Cochrane have very similar standards in terms of how to author a systematic review, and if you have a protocol registered with Campbell, you can access a lot of the supports offered to those who have protocols registered with the Cochrane Library. So it's a really, really great place to consider registering a review and publishing a protocol should you ever be interested in going down that route. The topics of the reviews that you can expect to find in the Cochrane Library include crime and justice, education, disability, business and management, and social welfare. And the library hosts systematic literature reviews and meta-analysis, but also evidence and gap maps, which are a newer evidence synthesis method that I'm going to show you a little bit later on. Okay, so as this review is actually still ongoing, and that will become clear to you in a little while why we have not yet finished this review, I've snapped a little picture here of the protocol, which is open access on the Campbell Systematic Review Library. So I've also put the link in, or the reference in at the end. You can go and access that from any device. The team involved in this review are Dr. Ciara Keenan, and the project was actually born from her master's dissertation project. Now, her master's was with us here at Queen's, but it was the Autism Spectrum Disorders Masters. But Ciara then went on to complete an evidence synthesis focused PhD. So she is an absolute expert in systematic literature reviews, and I personally have learned so much from her because while I thought I knew a lot about systematic literature reviews before I started this project, I actually knew very, very little. So then we have Professor Alan Thurston, myself, who was brought on as the ASD expert, and Carolina Urbanska, who sadly had to leave the team shortly after this protocol was published. And now we have a fellow from the Evidence Synthesis Ireland Fellowship, Dr. Karen McConnell, and she's worked absolutely tirelessly with us on this. And actually it was Karen that brought our attention and focus to involving stakeholders with this research. So the purpose of this review was to summarise the effectiveness of video-based interventions, or VBI, in promoting pro-social behaviours in young people with ASD. We kept our definition of pro-social behaviours very, very broad because it was really important to us that we gained the best possible understanding of how effective VBI actually is, and we didn't want to exclude any of the good practice done with this type of intervention purely because our target behaviour was too narrowly defined or outcomes were too narrowly defined. So for pro-social behaviour, for the purpose of this review, we included interactive social engagement, social understanding, safety skills, imaginative play, academic performance, community and vocational skills, and emotional regulation. And you can read more about examples of each of these in the protocol, and as I said, the reference is going to be at the end. So one of the reasons why this review was so important to conduct was that previous systematic reviews in this area, or previous systematic reviews in sort of video modelling, only focused on one type of video-based intervention or video modelling. And additionally, there were no meta-analysis that involved all types of video-based interventions. And it is really through this meta-analysis that the kind of scientific rigour and efficacy behind VBIs can be determined. And there's something that we use a lot in our practice. I know when I was in practice, we had many students that were using, video modelling programs for one thing or another. So this review, as you can see here, is will include studies that used all types of VBI interventions. So that's video feedback, video modelling, self-modelling, point of view modelling, video prompting and computer-based instruction. And really when we were screening, we tried to be as inclusive as possible about all of that. If something was, kind of teaching using an app and app-based instructions, that was all included as well under the remit, of course, of computer-based instruction. We also included both group and single subject research designs in the review, and all studies where one or more of the participants involved were between the ages of 3 and 18. So it wasn't the case that we would ever exclude a study because, some of the students in that study were 19, 20, 21. If one of the participants in the study was between the ages of 3 and 18, we looked for the data and included the data for that particular participant. So I'm not really going to go into the ins and outs of the review in the presentation because I do want the focus to be on stakeholder engagement more than the actual review itself. But I did want to include some figures here. Sorry. You always get a sore throat the week that you have to do some sort of presentation. It's just sod's law, isn't it? So yes, as I said, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the review. I'm not going to show you the Prisma diagram or anything like that. I want the focus to be on stakeholder engagement, but I've just included some figures to show you the scale of this review, and that may also make you understand a little bit more why we have not finished this review just yet. It's an unfunded project. The only part of the project that we have funding for is the stakeholder engagement, and we're all academics. Kira has moved on to the National Children's Bureau, but myself and Alan and Karen are all working and teaching, and this is something that we kind of try and do whenever we get a moment. So it's still ongoing, meaning that for you listening today, it's just very fresh information that you're getting. So we used Epi Reviewer to manage and analyse the data for this review, and this is something I recommend everyone to try, or something like Epi Reviewer, because it keeps all of your records in one place. It keeps track of all your records, and you can actually extract your data using the software. So it's just a much more streamlined approach to reviewing the literature, and it's kind of less possible to make mistakes. We used the Prisma statement in the formulation of this review. So when we searched our databases using our predetermined search strings, we had a total of 3,969 studies. Now, I will say that we left no stone unturned. We searched as many relevant databases as possible. Again, these can be found in the protocol, and we included grey literature as well. So we weren't just looking at peer-reviewed articles, we were including every piece of evidence on video-based interventions, and we had absolutely no limitations on dates. So that is why our number was so high, but we expected that, and we were a team of 4, and we had the Epi Reviewer software to make our screening a little bit quicker. And when we removed our duplicates and performed our title and abstract screening, we had a resulting 1,603 studies to screen at full text. And when we applied our inclusion and exclusion criteria to the full text, we ended up with a total of 617 primary studies and 97 reviews in total. Now this is really, really huge. And when we had the 1600 odd reviews to screen at full text, we thought there's absolutely no way. I mean, there must be something. We're going to be just excluding loads as we go through here, but we really weren't. We still now have a total of 617 primary studies and 97 reviews to extract data from and analyse that data. So it's huge, and while we're still working our way through the extraction process, we are populating our evidence and gap maps as well. But I suppose a good systematic literature review should always be continually updated and continually on the go, and that's what we tell ourselves when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed just with the sheer volume of studies that we have to get through. But I want to move on now that we're talking about data extraction to the stakeholder engagement side of this project and how this actually came about. So what is stakeholder engagement? And probably you're asking, what does this look like for a systematic literature review? So we'll just discuss first of all what stakeholder engagement is. So if you have a background in healthcare, you'll have heard of PPI, or patient-public involvement, and this is really synonymous with what we refer to as stakeholder engagement. A stakeholder in our field would include parents, caregivers, teachers, BCBAs or RBTs, any individual really that will be affected in terms of the care or provision or interventions that we provide to a person with ASD. But most importantly, and often forgotten, is that the individual with ASD themselves is also a stakeholder. They are the key stakeholder, arguably the most important stakeholder. So while in organisations such as even Beyond Autism, stakeholder engagement probably goes without saying, I'm sure I could learn an awful lot from the attendees at this conference, but we still talk very often in academia about the gap between research and practice. And one of the key things that we can do to try and fill that gap is to engage stakeholders in the research that we conduct about the very lives that they're living. And I'm going to argue that this should not be limited to conducting social validity checks when the research is almost concluded. You know, while gathering information on social validity is so important, it should never ever be forgotten. It's not really stakeholder engagement because you're only sort of asking for input from stakeholders or from autistic individuals or their parents or teachers or whatever after a piece of research has finished. So I wouldn't really consider that stakeholder engagement as such. The research behind stakeholder engagement argues that stakeholders should be involved in many stages of the research process, including the conception of the very idea. So while in the social sciences we do have some research methodologies that conduct research in this way, one of those would be like participatory action research or PAR. In the behaviour analytic field, we don't really seem to have this to the same extent. And in a systematic review, you could possibly argue, well, why do we need stakeholders involved? It's a synthesis of the literature. Involving stakeholders in evidence synthesis allows us to gain multiple perspectives and experiences so that we can massively reduce the amount of bias that's present in our research and ultimately present a systematic literature review at the end that's going to be useful to the majority of people. Involving stakeholders at the conception of a systematic literature review ensures we're synthesising research on a topic that's actually socially valid, and we're identifying gaps in the existing literature that might highlight important yet under-researched areas from the perspective of the autistic individual and those that are closely involved with them. So when it came to engaging stakeholders for this particular project, we grasped grasped hold of this idea a bit later on into the review, I'm sorry to say, and I'm going to discuss the challenges that came along with that at the end. But needless to say, when we discovered that we could engage stakeholders in a meaningful way in a systematic literature review, we jumped straight in. Okay, so we started to create, infographics like this along with our survey. And our survey was going to be designed basically to ask stakeholders, what do you want this review to show? What data would you like extracted? What kind of analysis would you like us to perform so that you can get as useful information about video-based interventions as possible? So because we're sort of in this COVID, online world, and people are using QR codes to take attendance during lectures and that sort of thing, we thought we'll take to Twitter, we'll create a survey, we'll create this, these really cool sort of links to the survey using QR codes, and we shared the link to this advertisement video. Now, I've tested this multiple times, but I am certain that when I do it now, it will probably not work. Or will it?
Researchers from Queen's University
It's not very long.
are asking for help with a systematic review on video-based interventions in children with autism spectrum disorders, or ASD. We are asking people with ASD, their families, carers, healthcare and education professionals to complete a short survey as they bring personal knowledge and experiences which will help to improve the quality and relevance of the review and promote better sharing of the review findings. First, let's tell you a bit more about systematic reviews. Practice should be informed by the best available evidence, and it's important that we don't rely on the results of a single study. A systematic review attempts to collect all available evidence and research on a particular topic in order to answer a specific research question and get a fuller picture of the evidence. For this review, we would like to find out if video-based interventions improve social behaviours in children with ASD, which social behaviours benefit most from video-based interventions, if behaviours learnt can be transferred to other situations and maintained after the intervention ends, and if certain characteristics such as age and gender influence the effectiveness of video-based interventions. We are asking you to complete a short 5-minute survey about what information we should extract from research studies included in the review, any patterns or trends we should look for, how we should share findings of the review, what we should consider to make sure everyone can access these findings, useful information for future reviews, and joining a small online group to help with the review until April next year. This survey is voluntary. You don't have to complete it and can skip questions you don't want to answer. There are no risks with taking part, but you will only be able to take part if you provide your consent. You can stop taking part at any time, but if you decide not to take part, please don't select Done, as your answers will be submitted and you won't be able to withdraw your information. Taking part in the small online group is also voluntary, and you will be able to withdraw at any time without providing a reason. Information will be collected and stored in Microsoft Forms, which complies with General Data Protection Regulations. Your email address is the only personal information that will be collected, and we will only use it to contact you with your permission. Information in Microsoft Forms will also be saved to the secure network at Queen's University Belfast, will be backed up daily by the university, and won't contain your email address to make sure your answers are anonymous. The research team will use your information to inform the review. Your information won't be published or shared outside of the review team and will be destroyed after 5 years. This study has been approved by the Ethics Committee in the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work. If you would like to take part, please click on the link. If you would like more information, please get in touch by email. Thank you for your help.
Created using Autism.
So unfortunately there we couldn't avoid the advertisement for Powtoon at the end, which is a free software that enables you to make sort of cartoon advertisements such as that. What was very interesting in creating that advertisement video was creating it as part of a very multidisciplinary team. You know, we have Karen McConnell, who is from a health background. She's a physiotherapist. She has very little experience with ASD, but she has good experience with, you know, patient public involvement. So she was able to kind of come in on that end. I was able to come in and say, well, look, we need the video to be very visual. And then obviously we had Kira, who was able to give us that sort of nice summary of what a systematic literature review is to somebody who may not have any experience whatsoever with a systematic literature review. So that was our little video that we kind of hoped would entice people in to complete our survey. So we will just move on to the survey now. What I've done, rather than kind of take you out of the presentation and go on the forms, is that I've screenshotted most of the key pages from the survey and popped them into the slides here. So the first thing we had when people entered the survey was our eligibility screening. We did ask that autistic individuals were aged 16 years or older, and obviously given the format of the survey, they would, you know, need to be able to read or else have somebody there with them that would read the questions and answer options out to them. The survey and the questions, well, the kind of lack of accompanying visuals for this is one of the things that I think that we did not do so well. But, you know, we have learned from that and we do recognise that. So please select which of the following categories you fall under. That was just for us to have an idea of what type of stakeholder was giving us this input on our systematic review. So data extraction, we explain again that a systematic review involves extracting information from research studies in a particular area. So in this instance, we wanted to extract information related to video-based interventions and their impact on social skills and behaviours in children with ASD. So what information we were asking people did they think was important for us to extract from the research studies included in the review? So we put in options such as, was it the length of each session? Was it the frequency of each session? You know, to kind of give people an idea of how feasible it would be maybe to conduct an intervention using a video-based intervention, how VBI is delivered, who would deliver it, the equipment required, you know, the cost of it, adverse events associated with VBI. These were all really important things that I suppose as a team, prior to involving stakeholders, we had decided that we might want to look at, but ultimately we are not the people that will benefit the most from actually having this review. It's autistic individuals and those close to them, so it's important that we kind of change course directly in terms of data extraction and go in line with what results the survey gives us. Sorry, I should have also said that for every question down at the bottom we had a category for other. So in between each of the questions there was another page that said other, and it gave space for people to write maybe something that we hadn't thought of here. So we asked about analysis. Once we've extracted useful information from the research studies, we will summarise it and look for patterns or trends. We'll try to find out which social skills benefit most from VBI, if the skills learned can be transferred to other situations, if the skills are maintained after the intervention ends, and if age or gender influences the effectiveness of the intervention. So we'll ask people to give us their opinion on what other patterns or trends that we should look for. You know, that might be the setting. Does conducting VBI in home, school or workplaces influence effectiveness? Does the model, that was something that as a team we actually wanted to look at anyway. You know, do people learn best when the model in video modelling interventions is a peer, if it's self, if it's cartoon, can that influence effectiveness? And then there, of course, you see other, and we let people feed into that question too. Dissemination. So once the review's been finished, we'll share it with people with ASD and their families, health and education professionals who work with children with ASD, and charities and voluntary sector organisations that support people with ASD. How do you think we should share the findings of the review? We feel that this is really, really important to stakeholder engagement because we do have an issue, I think, in academia and research about who accesses research findings and how accessible these are. I mean, sometimes they're actually hidden away in journals that are behind paywalls, or, you know, that you can only access if you are registered as a student with a particular institution, and that's not what we want. That's not useful to anybody, really. So we made suggestions like, would you like us to create a cartoon video like the advertisement one? A video involving the research team where we as a team would talk out the findings. Video involving autistic individuals, a podcast, infographics, short summary for children and short summary for families. And again, we had more options there, and we also had an option to give us your own opinion. Accessibility. We want to make sure the results of the review can be accessed by everybody, and which of the following issues should be considered to ensure you can access findings of the review. And other outcomes. So we wanted to know for future reviews what might be useful to individuals, autistic individuals and stakeholders, other stakeholders involved. So could we look at video-based interventions and their impact on gross motor skills, on physical activity, fine motor skills, speech skills, or eye tracking? What kind of influenced this question was that we did have to exclude studies if they their outcomes weren't focused on kind of pro-social behaviour. And I think particularly for Karen, being a physiotherapist, she's seen some amazing VBI stuff on physical activity and gross motor skills, and I think she is really interested in taking that forward. So we kind of thought, well, we'll ask what else might be useful in terms of video-based interventions. So this is the section where we asked people to either tick yes or no and provide us with their contact details so that we could create an expert advisory group. And we wanted that expert advisory group to be involved from, you know, the point that we released this survey and gathered the findings and gathered the email addresses right up to the end of the review. Because we were sort of thinking, well, if we don't get enough responses from the survey, or you know, we want to make sure that the responses to the survey are sort of kept up to date, so that if anything else cropped up as we were working on the review, and someone in the stakeholder group sort of said, you know, excuse me, I really think that you need to be extracting this is going to be really useful to people, that we would have that sort of up-to-date knowledge from stakeholders, and that the remainder of the review wouldn't be influenced by us, who were probably going to be at that stage so focused on the project that we can't see the wood for the trees. Okay, so we did get a VBI advisory group off the back of the survey. It's currently comprised of stakeholders from clinical settings. So we have a couple of people in the US and one individual from the UK who is working in, you know, a clinical and ABA based setting. They sit on our stakeholder advisory group. We have a couple of academics in the field of ASD research. We have autistic researchers, so these individuals do work in universities as well, but you know, we think it's very, very important that we have the autistic voice on this. Parents and ASD charities. And recruitment for this advisory group did come mostly from the survey, where people gave us their email address and said, you know, we could go ahead and contact them. But we didn't have any autistic stakeholders that came forward from that survey. So they were recruited through an already existing contact that we had. They consult with us on all areas of the review, but at this stage it's primarily data extraction. They are not expected to, you know, have a massive time commitment with this whatsoever. It's 1 hour once every 3 months. The review team presents the progress to date, and we really, really value the feedback from the advisory group. It either lets us know that we are completely on the right track, everything's going okay, or it lets us know where we've maybe dropped the ball and gone off course a little bit. It keeps the review moving as well, because obviously we present to this group every 3 months. We need to have something different to present to them every time. Okay, so I do want to talk about challenges that we faced. At this point, I really want to emphasise that while I think that we did some things very well with our attempts to engage stakeholders, we have a lot to learn about this process, and there were some things that we didn't do very well at all. Like for me personally, I didn't think that the survey, I thought that we could have put a lot more effort into the survey using visuals, for example, and being a bit more accessible to all. Okay, so there were things, yes, that we didn't do very well. Some of those were our own fault as a team, and some of the challenges that we faced are really synonymous with challenges in engaging stakeholders more generally. So in the very beginning, I made an argument that effective stakeholder engagement should take place early, right at the conception of a project. This actually wasn't the case for this review. And this is because the review was initially conducted as part of a master's dissertation project. So at the time when Ciara initially started this and submitted her dissertation, we didn't have funding available to engage stakeholders. And you know, you do want to pay people for their time. And to be perfectly honest, we didn't have that funding until we got to the initial screening stages, you know, after we had done our searches and we started screening through abstracts and full text. And we realised, okay, pump the brakes before we start extracting any data here. We need to make this relevant, so we do need to get stakeholders involved. Now, while at least we did sort of catch ourselves, by the time we shared our infographics on Twitter and we generated some interest, we received really valid points, like some people questioning our categorisation of VBI or our inclusion of each of those categories of pro-social behaviour. And because the review was already underway, those weren't really things that we could change at that point in time. So we did lose the interest of stakeholders because of that, because we can't make an argument, you know, we want stakeholders to inform this, oh, but we're not going to take that piece of advice on from you. You know, I did understand why we did lose some interest because of that. The second very obvious challenge we faced is that while we had very high engagement on Twitter and lots of what seemed, you know, like interest, we had only 11 people respond to the survey. We had this open for 4 weeks and just 11 people responded, and we were really disappointed in that. But when we took a look at what we shared on Twitter, we realised, okay, we've made these really cool infographics, but we've not given people any indication of how long this survey is going to take to complete. And we've also provided links to this massively long protocol, and they might think, oh my gosh, look at the length of that protocol. Are we going to have to fill out a massive survey as long as that protocol? So on reflection, we should have said, look, this is our protocol if you want to read it, but we really only need you to answer a 6-question survey. It's going to take X number of minutes. I think there's an issue too with Twitter, in that Twitter was the only social media platform that we used to advertise the project, because as academics and researchers, we're all quite active on Twitter and we had good followings. So we thought, it'll be fine, we'll get lots of people responding to the survey. But in actual fact on Twitter, it's very easy, isn't it, to just press like and retweet something and say, I'll come back to that later, and not actually do that. So in hindsight, I think that we should have used email, used other channels to get people to fill in the survey. And lastly, one of our challenges, which circles back around to not engaging stakeholders early enough, was that in the school that all 4 of the team members were working at that time, we had to get ethical approval to ask stakeholders to engage with us. This was a little bit confusing, especially for Karen, who's coming from a public health background, where stakeholder engagement, as she knew it, was patient and public involvement, and sharing ideas in her field between researchers and the public would never have needed ethical approval. But in the social sciences, ultimately, we're asking people to fill in a questionnaire and share their personal information as well as their opinions on something, and that did actually require an ethics application to be completed when we sort of asked around and got in touch with the ethics committee, and it had to be approved, which again ate into our time, because if anyone here has conducted a bit of research, you will know that ethical approval takes time. But solutions, so if we're going to, be positive about this, which of course we should, the solutions to the challenges we faced, I feel, are that when you're initially discussing a research project of any kind, plan at that stage how you will engage your stakeholders. Just as when we're, planning interventions, we're told constantly that we should plan for maintenance and generalisation, and we should. When we're planning research, we should plan on how we will engage stakeholders. The second solution is to be transparent about what you're asking for. Eye-catching infographics are great. As a team, we were very proud of the infographics we created to link people to the survey, but ultimately we didn't tell them, what sort of time commitment it was going to take to complete the survey. In fact, we said very little about it. I think that we should have had a little bit more text on those infographics to give people an idea of what was expected. And then they might have been able to make their own decision at that point that, okay, I've got 6 minutes here, I'm able to complete this survey. Then Twitter, it's a great place to raise awareness and build momentum, but you won't appeal to everyone on there. And I know that might not seem like a solution, but I think take that statement just as it is. If you can accept that you won't appeal to everyone on Twitter, and that particularly in the behaviour analytic field, sometimes when you're active on Twitter, you do receive a little bit of backlash. I just accept that, take it for what it is, and try and display a bit of understanding on both parts and move on. Unfortunately, we did have a case where things were going great the first couple of days that we'd started tweeting about the survey, and then we sort of had maybe 3 or 4 anti-ABA kind of activists come on. They'd obviously clicked on the protocol, and about halfway down the first page of the protocol, there's a mention that, the theoretical framework behind video-based interventions comes from both Bandura and learning theory and applied behaviour analysis, and it did not go down well at all. A couple of the team members were quite shocked and a little bit upset, because obviously they weren't behaviour analysts, they weren't used to that kind of treatment on Twitter. But I don't want to go into that too much. As a field, that's something that we are dealing with and I think making progress with. But obviously it kind of attached our tweets and our surveys to something a little bit negative, and I noticed that as a team, we did slow down on kind of tweeting that out there and advertising it, because, you know, it's hard to receive that kind of criticism on an open platform like that. But I think Twitter is great, it has its place, but we definitely shouldn't have limited ourselves to just using Twitter. Okay, so the biggest challenge came from the fact that we didn't engage our stakeholders from conception. So to try and come up with solutions for this, we need to think about how we decide what research is actually necessary to conduct. I know that I'll definitely miss something here, and I'm very happy to be reminded of that come question time. But I do think that having worked at the practice end of the ASD field and the academic end, I can draw on both of those experiences to answer this a little bit. You know, when I worked in schools and in clinical settings, the research that we conducted, it was driven mostly from kind of individual need. So for example, if we had a student really struggling with a Mandan program and we decided to try, you know, some sort of multi-component intervention, we would go ahead and do that and then maybe write that up and publish that as a paper. It was very prevalent that happened when I worked in the New England Centre for Children, because that was a centre that it had academics that were linked with an outside university, but those academics were ultimately BCBAs at doctoral level, and they were programme directors within the school as well. So there was a really good research culture there, and it worked really well engaging stakeholders at conception there, because obviously we identified some need. We used to, you know, ring parents, chat with the students themselves and say, look, what if we try this? It was a really great setup. Now that I'm working in academia, the literature really drives my research decision making. What's synonymous between those two situations is that we conduct research that is necessary either for an individual or because there's a gap in the literature. But if stakeholders should be involved at the very conception of a research idea, and research is conducted so frequently in academia, it's important that our research is accessible to everybody. I feel that there is very little point in the research being hidden away in academic journals that not everybody has access to, and that can sometimes be filled with technical jargon, and so not easily very understood by the people that the research really matters to. So the next thing I want to discuss is a new way to present our research, but more specifically a new way to present where the gaps in autism research lie. A way that these gaps can be identified by anybody, autistic individuals, their parents, caregivers, teachers, healthcare professionals, and what have you, that can identify that. So yes, so we want, you know, those stakeholders to be saying, okay, it would be really, really useful to conduct research in this particular area, and have them be able to lead on that and provide input from the very beginning. So we're going to talk now about how evidence and gap maps may be a way to do that. So an evidence and gap map basically tells us how much evidence is available in a particular area. It won't tell you what that evidence is, but you can use the actual pinpoints on an evidence and gap map to access the research. Perhaps if it's the case that you aren't looking to start a new research project, but you do need to access research on a particular topic, maybe to help you with a case issue in work, maybe you have a student who's not responding very well to non-differential reinforcement, and you want to find out, okay, is there another way that I can sort of tackle this issue? You could go to an evidence and gap map on that particular issue and see what the literature says. You can then click on the pinpoints and bring up a whole ream of studies in that area. You can use the filters on an evidence and gap map to tell you as much information about the study as you need. So that might be things like study design. An evidence and gap map can tell you maybe that there's lots of research on Mandan using single subject research design, but there's very little research on Mandan using a small group design. So therefore you know that there's a gap in that area. So I'm going to show you our evidence and gap map for the VBI review, and hopefully that makes things a little bit clearer. Okay, so this is our evidence and gap map. You can see that along the top we have the social outcomes that we were looking for: social engagement, imaginative play, safety skills, academic performance, so on and so forth. And then down the left hand side there you have the types of video modelling. Now obviously I had to screenshot this and cut it in and know that we looked at more types of VBI than that. Along the bottom there you have a key, okay? So this key refers to, in the video modelling research, whether the model was a peer, whether the model was the individual themselves, whether it was a cartoon, or whether it was an adult. So like if we take a quick look there, we can see that there is a massive amount of research in the areas of video modelling using both peer and adult models, and a little bit on self-modelling too in the area of social engagement. If we move across, we can see that there's actually been quite a small amount of research, surprisingly. Now our map is not completely populated yet, so this is just some of our research that's been put into it. You can see here that there's quite a small amount of research done on imaginative play, and the research that has been done uses peer modelling. If you go over again there, you can see that for safety skills, that is definitely going to be an area where we need some additional research because it's quite sparse. So I hope you know that makes it quite clear for you. I just absolutely love this new idea of using evidence and gap maps. I think that what it's really going to do, very importantly, is stop that kind of saturation of research that's done in particular areas. I feel that there are some areas of this field that are just absolutely saturated with research, even in my own area of interest, which is looking at literacy and evidence-based practices to promote literacy, and that may be within the autism field or outside it. It's saturated. Like, there are so many interventions that are evaluated and published in journals that focus on increasing literacy skills. So that's what I mean by saturated. This lets you say, okay, this would be really original to do this. I think it's evidence and gap maps are so easily understood. You could have a student come on here and just look and say, okay, I'm really interested in doing a PhD, but obviously for my proposal I need to find, a novel niche area. I'm going to use the gap map to see, where things need to be done. You could have a parent come on here and say, okay, we're struggling at home with activities of daily living. I wonder what's out there. I wonder what I could use to sort of learn from or get a couple of ideas from the research. And you can see there that we have that. If we had something like this done across topics in autism research, I think it would put us in a really good place. Now, I just wanted to show you this slide as well, because while I said in the beginning, it shows you what research has been done, but not what, the literature actually says about that. You can then apply your filters. So I have all filters ticked here just so you can see like a whole load of research articles, but you can go in, you can get what the actual research article is. You can even get the link to it on the bottom. Hopefully you would have access, and you can go and read more in depth about what the literature says about a particular topic area. A lot of the things I hear or I heard when I was working in schools during my PhD collecting data was that teachers were very, very interested in, using alternative methods with children that were struggling, but they didn't really know where to go to get those methods. They just kind of were told things from a sort of top-down approach, and often, as you know, some of those approaches that they may be told to try with their children that are falling behind may not exactly be evidence-based. So I used to have lots of conversations all the time, but where do I find the kind of evidence-based literature? This is a really, I think, easy way of accessing that literature. So there you go, I've got in my evidence and gap maps at the end there because I just love them. I think they're so intuitive, and I really hope that we pick them up going forward and we use them a lot more regularly. So just some conclusions. I am almost done. I've went 5 minutes over time. I'm so sorry. Stakeholder engagement could be a very effective way to close the gap between research and practice, because if we can use something like evidence and gap maps to get our stakeholders involved in the conception of a research idea, it's a lot easier. I think it's a lot more enjoyable and a lot more valuable to be involved in something right at the beginning than to be brought on kind of halfway through and to already have some disagreements or questions about what's been done to date. I think you can get people a lot more excited about getting involved in a research project if they've been involved from the very beginning. Autistic individuals and their families are best placed to advise on research conducted on or about their lives. If you want to make something really, really useful and really valuable, have an autistic individual or their family member or whoever, whatever field it is that you work in, have a representative from that field who is directly going to be impacted by the work that you're doing on your research team. It's easier to get people excited and engaged with a project that they have designed than an already existing project, and evidence and gap maps are accessible and they're easily understood by stakeholders from a range of backgrounds. So I just want to extend a thank you to my brilliant VBI team and our expert advisory group, who unfortunately can't be photographed here or pictured or named because of our ethical constraints. But thank you to Dr. Ciara Keenan, who's now with the National Children's Bureau, Karen McConnell in physiotherapy, and Professor Alan Thurston. So I'm going to be on at the end here for questions, but if you have something that you want to ask me or something that you want to know a little bit more about, please don't hesitate to contact me via email. I just love talking about this. I hope that that's been apparent during this lecture. And lastly, just some resources for you. I've linked to the Campbell collaboration there if you want to read more about them as an organisation, and just some resources that I used in developing this talk. Thank you so much for having me, and I really look forward to questions.
Hi, welcome back everybody. I hope you managed to get something to eat or a little bit of break away from your screens. I'm hoping to be able to invite Catherine into the video chat now to have our Q&A just before we roll into the next presentation. Here she is. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I was very flustered there, but I'm glad we got started.
It wasn't just you, don't worry.
Okay, that's good.
Well, welcome back, and apologies for the technical glitch. It turns out for everybody who might be interested, it depends on your browser. So there you go. Yeah. All right. So sorry there's a little bit disjointed away from your talk, but I'll take you through some of the comments and a couple of the questions. So we had Hira, who had lots to say actually in this. It's obviously an area of real interest for her. And she starts off by saying that she 100% agree. It's so very frustrating to see it's so very refreshing rather to see other behaviour analysts acknowledging the need to include stakeholders at each step of the research process and moving towards mixed methods approach to research. Is that something that I guess, drove your as part of your interest? Like, was that the thing that kind of piqued the motivation to look into this?
Yeah, definitely. So, like, I work with a very small number of behavior analysts, but in a very interdisciplinary department in the university I work in. So, the kind of single subject research design in general is just not well understood. And then we work with like a lot of social workers and stuff as well. So, kind of from very early on, when I started in my academic post, I have been interested in ways that we can conduct research kind of outside of this, you know, small, more focused research design. And I actually think that it will have a lot of benefits as well for the kind of representation that we have as a science as well. Um, and the reach of people, you know, that we can sort of disseminate to, because when you think of single subject research design, I mean, it's very technical, and if you're not kind of within the discipline, it can be difficult to understand. And I really recognize that working on this review with people who were not behavior analysts and didn't have much of a background in the field. So I think there's always work that we can do there. Yeah.
Here is just commented she's going to come visit you.
Oh, be nice to have more behavior analysts.
Well, that's it. So on the basis of you talked about single case design there. Did you? This also came from Hero. Did you? What was your kind of way of thinking about different types of research design for the project? Like, did you include or exclude certain things? Were you totally about the single case design? Were you more? I mean, I know you talked about the meta-analysis of literature reviews.
Yeah.
But what was your thought process in how you developed your design?
So our inclusion criteria where research design was concerned was really very, very broad. Obviously, it couldn't be that broad for the meta-analysis. So we really needed to conduct a meta-analysis. You do kind of have to have a control group, but we've not reached that stage yet. And Javier Veruz Ortega, he has published on including single subject research designs in meta-analysis. So we are looking at how we can do that in combination with the kind of randomized control trial and group studies that we have included as well. In terms of the kind of other half of the review, which is our narrative synthesis, we've been as broad as possible. The only thing that we have unfortunately excluded is qualitative studies, because the purpose of the review is to determine the efficacy of video-based interventions. So we kind of do need to have something a bit more quantitative to go off there. But there were no limits. Like, we did not just include single subject research design or randomized control trials for that matter either.
There's like an irony to this, isn't there, where you're trying to think about stakeholders and breadth, and then you're having to think about how you funnel it down to the way that you can get your information, which exactly. The life of a researcher, right? I mean, it's tricky.
It's a challenge.
So there was a further comment that one of the main arguments that they kept hearing, which Hero keeps hearing from the autistic community about ABA efficacy research, is the inherent personal professional bias, which you did mention in your speech, in your talk. And she says, to be bluntly honest, we have not included autistic voices when conducting autism research, which, putting it this way, just seems ridiculous. So I hope your and your team's efforts to include these voices will go a long way towards bridging this gap.
Yeah, it's, I think it's easy to be, and I would be the first to be, like, kind of very hard on us as a field, and that only comes from a place of wanting to improve and wanting to disseminate and even like be more relatable. But it's not without its challenges. In my other kind of side of research, I'm quite interested in like improving literacy skills, and within that we have this massive challenge of, well, what do we do about the non-verbal population, and how do we kind of manage that? So we don't have answers to these questions yet, and we are only going to have answers if we start working with stakeholders who have a lot more insight than us that can actually advise on that. So there are really unanswered questions. What is the best way to go about this? And also, what is the best way to include a representative sample of the autistic population, which includes non-verbal people as well?
Funnily enough, that's what I was thinking when I was listening to your presentation, is that what seems like a very kind of basic premise, and I guess to go off the back of Hira's comment around it, it seems ridiculous that there isn't that kind of inclusion from the beginning. It is a huge can of worms, because funnily enough, we had a comment from one of our attendees, from Jane, talking about being careful about talking about including autistic voices in research, that we don't actually mean only verbal autistic voices, which is what you just said.
Yeah. We really have to think of effective ways to do that. And you could say that about any field whatsoever. There's a lot of people making certain policy decisions across kind of all areas of society that maybe are not best placed to do that. But it's I think that we just can't be too hard on ourselves just yet. We need to maybe start taking small steps, first of all, to include stakeholders from conception, so that they can essentially guide us on what is the best way to do that.
Yeah, it's politically difficult as well, I imagine, because you consider the most vocal verbal individuals in any field as stakeholders might end up driving towards their own kind of biases, I guess, and in that way we have another layer of whose voice is it anyway, or whose decision is it anyway. Gosh, yeah, it makes my brain hurt a little bit, but it's like anything though, isn't it? When you're trying to change something, there's always that first step, and I think resonating through a lot of positions today.
It became so apparent to us in the very, very early stages, like when we were kind of designing the review and the data extraction methods, we had an agenda. There's a physio on the team who was really interested in kind of gross and fine motor skills and that sort of thing. And I knew what I was interested in. Kira knew what she was interested in. And then we were like, okay, this is all great, but this may not be relevant to anybody but us.
You've got all these colliding motivating operations.
Yeah.
Oh, very well. I mean, presumably, I think you said at the top of your presentation that this is the beginning of, almost an unimaginable amount of time that you might be spending on this. If you've got certain markers moving forward where you're going to be publishing, considering outputs.
Yeah, we we kind of have an agenda as researchers. We're held, we have the ref, we have the need that we need to publish papers for our career progression and that kind of thing. But what we've learned through this study, and this does sound really, really cheesy, but what we've learned has been so valuable, that everybody has kind of dropped the agenda that at the end of this we will have this really great 4-star publication, because we're just seeing so many exciting things come out of it. Like I would much rather create like a cartoon video to demonstrate the findings of this review than actually sit and write a paper, to be perfectly honest, if I think it's going to reach more people. And we have kind of worked out little ways that we can create outputs as we go throughout the process. But it's just because we've kept it so broad, it's just returned a massive amount of research. And then in the wake of COVID and stuff too, it's increasing all the time.
And I guess that's what's so great about your research. I mean, you've asked a question that has posed many other questions.
Yeah, thank you.
You're going to be busier. We know that much.
Fingers crossed.
On a practical side, Mike has asked, in your experience, has funding been a common stumbling block in stakeholder engagement?
To be honest, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that, because this is my first time kind of dipping my toes into stakeholder engagement. We didn't have any problems whatsoever. We just kind of went to the Campbell collaboration and said, we really want to involve stakeholders in this. We noticed that this hasn't been done in any of the other reviews that have been published, or at least they don't report that it has been done. Can we please have some money to do it? And they were basically like, yeah, here you go. So we didn't have issues with that. at all. But I would imagine, given the state of funding in general at the minute, that it could be an issue. But then on the flip side, we do have kind of a lot of issues at the minute around the need to involve the right people in these sorts of things. So potentially there may be more interest in from funders for research if you're doing something different that is actually going towards bridging that gap. Because
it's definitely been talked about for as long as I can remember. At different levels. So clearly it's an extending zeitgeist that needs that kind of clearly like a paper analytical position as well as the multidisciplinary team, which I think is really interesting. Okay. Thank you, Catherine, for coming back. I appreciate it's a bit awkward, and for everybody for returning. It's really nice to see everybody back to hear any further insights. As Catherine said, she has put the email on the presentation, which we'll be sharing, or it will be available to people if you've got further comments, questions, suggestions, etc. So thank you once again, and we will hopefully see you again sometime.
Yes, thank you, and I'm sorry for the delay, and have a brilliant conference, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Catherine.
Bye.